The unrelenting rain had soaked through Zachary Baxter's custom Italian shoes, turning what was supposed to be a tranquil first visit to his newly purchased 50 acres of pristine Montana wilderness into a muddy ordeal. But even as water dripped from his designer coat, a smile played across his rugged face. This was exactly what he'd wanted: raw, untamed nature, far from the corporate battlefield where he'd made his millions. Not exactly what you're used to, Mr. Baxter. Asked the land agent, huddled under an umbrella that kept losing its battle with the wind. It's perfect, Zachary replied, his deep voice carrying over the sound of raindrops hammering against the forest canopy. After 15 years of building his construction empire from nothing, he'd earned this escape. At 38, he was ready for something real, something that didn't include board meetings and profit margins. The agent looked relieved. The property line extends to that ridge. Your nearest neighbor is about a half-mile east, but with all these trees, you'll hardly know they exist. Zachary nodded, already envisioning the cabin he would build with his own hands. His phone vibrated in his pocket, probably his CFO with another emergency, but for once, he let it ring. As they trudged back to their vehicles, a flash of movement caught his eye. Through sheets of rain, he glimpsed a figure in a yellow raincoat disappearing among the trees at the edge of what was now his property. "Is someone trespassing?" he asked, frowning. The agent squinted through the downpour. "Probably just Daisy Reynolds. She owns the adjacent property, been here for years, makes handcrafted furniture, keeps to herself mostly." Zachary felt a flicker of annoyance. He'd specifically chosen this location for its isolation. The last thing he wanted was a nosy neighbor. "Don't worry," the agent continued, noticing his expression. "Most folks around here respect property lines like religion." 2 weeks later, Zachary returned with a truck full of building supplies and basic camping equipment. He'd taken a leave of absence that had shocked his executive team, but felt right in every way. The temporary yurt he'd ordered had arrived ahead of him and been set up by local contractors, giving him a place to sleep while he worked on his cabin. On his third morning, he was marking foundation lines when a voice startled him. "You're building too close to the seasonal creek." Zachary straightened, turning to find a woman standing at what he assumed was the edge of his property. She was tall and athletic, with copper hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her face, lightly freckled and sun-touched, bore no makeup. She wore work jeans and a flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, revealing toned forearms. "Excuse me," he said, irritation evident in his tone. "When the snow melts next spring, this whole area floods. You'll lose your foundation." She pointed to subtle marks on nearby trees. "See those water lines? That's from last April." Zachary stood to his full 6'2" height, not accustomed to having his decisions questioned. "I've hired the best architects. The plans account for drainage." The woman shrugged. "Your property, your problem. I'm Daisy Reynolds, by the way." She didn't extend her hand. "Zachary Baxter," he replied stiffly, "the millionaire from Seattle." It wasn't a question. "Does everyone know my business around here?" She smiled for the first time, and despite his annoyance, Zachary noticed how it transformed her face. Small town. News travels. Especially when someone buys the old Henderson property for 3 times its value. His jaw tightened. "I paid what I thought it was worth. To you, maybe." She cast a critical eye over his work. "You building this yourself? That's the plan. Ever built anything before? I own one of the largest construction companies in the Pacific Northwest." "That's not what I asked." Zachary felt his temper rising. "Look, Miss Reynolds, Daisy, I appreciate the neighborly concern, but I know what I'm doing." She nodded slowly. "Well, when that creek turns your fancy cabin into a houseboat, my door's open." With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees before he could respond. Zachary spent the rest of the day rechecking his plans, though he'd never admit he was second-guessing himself because of a stranger's warning. By evening, he'd convinced himself the original location was fine. The architects had done soil samples. They knew what they were doing. That night, a storm rolled in, even fiercer than the one on his first visit. Rain pounded against his yurt, and wind threatened to tear the structure from its moorings. Unable to sleep, Zachary ventured outside under the shelter of a tarp to check his supplies. Water was already pooling exactly where he'd planned to build. "Damn it," he muttered, rain soaking through his clothes. He'd need to reconsider the entire layout, which meant days of wasted work. The next morning broke clear and crisp. Zachary was remeasuring the property when he noticed smoke rising from beyond the trees to the east. Curious despite himself, he followed what appeared to be a narrow trail that connected their properties. He emerged into a clearing occupied by a charming two-story cabin with a wrap-around porch. Behind it stood a large workshop, from which he could hear the sound of power tools. The cabin itself was clearly hand-built, but with an attention to detail that impressed even him. Native stonework formed the foundation and chimney, while the rest was constructed from timber that had likely come from the surrounding forest. As he approached the workshop, the noise stopped. Daisy appeared in the doorway, safety goggles pushed up on her head, wood dust coating her clothes. "Came to admit I was right," she asked, a hint of amusement in her green eyes. Zachary cleared his throat. "I'm reconsidering my building site." "Smart man." She stepped aside. "Want some coffee?" "You look like you had a rough night." Pride told him to decline, but curiosity won out. He followed her into the workshop, where the rich smell of freshly cut wood enveloped them. Inside, he was stunned by what he saw: exquisite handcrafted furniture in various stages of completion. A dining table with intricate inlay work, chairs with curves that seemed to defy the rigidity of wood, cabinets with dovetail joints so perfect they looked machine-made. "You made all this?" he asked, unable to hide his admiration. Daisy handed him a mug of coffee. "That's how I pay the bills. Custom pieces for people who appreciate craftsmanship. These should be in galleries," he said, running his hand over a polished tabletop. "Some are, but I prefer making things people actually use." She leaned against her workbench. "So, Millionaire, what brings you to our little corner of nowhere?" The question was direct, but her tone had softened. Zachary found himself answering honestly. "Needed a break. Wanted to build something with my own hands for once." She studied him over her coffee mug. "Most people just buy a sports car for their midlife crisis," he laughed, surprising himself. "Already have 3, they didn't help." "And you think a cabin will? Worth a try." Daisy set down her mug. "Show me your plans." For the next hour, they pored over his blueprints, spread across her workbench. Daisy pointed out issues he hadn't considered: the way snow would load on his proposed roof design, how the prevailing winds would affect heating efficiency, where the best light would fall throughout the seasons. "This is an ambitious project for someone who's never swung a hammer," she said finally. "I've swung plenty of hammers," he protested. "Just not recently." She gave him a skeptical look. "When was the last time?" "Summer job in college," he grimaced. 20 years ago." Daisy burst out laughing, and Zachary found himself joining in. There was something disarming about her directness. "Tell you what," she said, "I'll help you. In exchange, you can help me with my tax nightmare. My accountant just retired, and I'm drowning in paperwork for my business." Zachary raised an eyebrow. "You're proposing a trade, my financial expertise for your building skills?" Problem with that, he should have been offended. He paid consultants thousands per hour for their expertise, but instead he found himself nodding. "Deal," he said, extending his hand. When their hands met, he felt a jolt that had nothing to do with static electricity. From Daisy's momentary widening of eyes, she'd felt it too. The next few weeks established a routine. Mornings, they worked on his cabin, now relocated to higher ground with better drainage. Afternoons, he helped organize her chaotic bookkeeping system while she worked on customer orders. He was impressed by the demand for her pieces, which commanded prices that surprised even him. "Why don't you hire help?" he asked one day as they sorted through invoices. "You've got more orders than you can handle alone." Daisy shook her head. I tried once, the quality suffered. Each piece needs to have my hands on it from start to finish. That's not scalable as a business model. Not everything needs to scale, Zachary. She gave him a pointed look. Some things are valuable precisely because they can't be mass-produced. He considered this as he watched her sand a table leg, her movements precise and almost meditative. In his world, growth was always the goal: more projects, more revenue, more employees. The idea that something could be complete and perfect in its smallness was foreign to him. As they worked side by side on his cabin, Zachary found himself looking forward to their conversations. Daisy challenged him in ways no one had in years. She asked questions about his life that went beyond the superficial, and surprisingly, he found himself answering truthfully. "Why construction?" she asked one afternoon as they installed roof beams. "My father was a foreman," he replied, securing a joint. "I spent summers on job sites, learning everything from foundation work to finishing. When he died my sophomore year of college, I dropped out to support my mom and sisters, started taking small renovation jobs, then bigger ones, eventually incorporated. And now, 2,000 employees. Projects across 5 states. Daisy handed him another beam. "But you're not happy." It wasn't a question, and the accuracy of her observation struck him silent for a moment. "I built something impressive," he finally said, "just not something I care about anymore." She nodded as if this made perfect sense. "That's why you're here." As autumn deepened, bringing frosty mornings and spectacular foliage, the cabin took shape. Zachary found muscles he'd forgotten he had, and his hands grew calloused in ways that never happened in boardrooms. He slept better than he had in years, despite the physical exhaustion. One evening, as they sat on Daisy's porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, she asked, "Will you stay here when the cabin's finished?" Zachary considered the question. "I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead." "That's a first," she teased. "The man with 5-year strategic plans hasn't thought about what comes after the cabin," he smiled, watching how the fading light brought out auburn highlights in her hair. "Maybe I'm learning to live in the present." She turned to look at him, her expression suddenly serious. "Careful, city boy, you might discover you like it here." Something in her tone made his heart beat faster. Would that be so terrible? Depends on why you're staying. Before he could respond, her phone rang, a client with a question about a commission. The moment passed, but Zachary found himself thinking about it late into the night. The next morning, he arrived at the cabin site to find Daisy already there, unloading windows from her truck. "These just came in," she said by way of greeting. "Thought we could install them today before the weather turns." Weather forecasts had predicted the first significant snowfall of the season. Already, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the air held a crystalline quality that promised snow. They worked efficiently, their movements now synchronized after weeks of collaboration. By mid-afternoon, they had installed all the windows except one. "Last one," Daisy said, lifting the heavy frame. As she stepped backward, her boot caught on a coil of wire. Zachary lunged forward, catching her before she could fall, but the windows slipped from their grasp, shattering on the partially finished floor. "Are you okay?" he asked, still holding her arms. "Fine," she said, but he noticed she was shaking slightly. "That was stupid of me." "It's just glass," he said. "It can be replaced." She pulled away, kneeling to gather the larger shards. "It's expensive glass that took 3 weeks to arrive." "Daisy, stop." He crouched beside her, gently taking her hands to prevent her from cutting herself. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," she snapped, then immediately looked contrite. "I'm sorry, I hate making mistakes." The vulnerability in her voice surprised him. Always so confident, so self-assured, Daisy rarely showed this side of herself. "Even master craftspeople make mistakes," he said softly, still holding her hands. "Isn't that what you told me when I messed up that joist?" A reluctant smile tugged at her lips. "Using my words against me, learning from the best." Their eyes met, and suddenly the air between them felt charged. They were close enough that he could see flecks of gold in her green eyes, count the freckles across her nose. His gaze dropped to her lips, and he saw her breath catch. The first snowflakes began to fall through the unfinished roof, landing on their shoulders and hair. One settled on Daisy's cheek, and without thinking, Zachary brushed it away with his thumb. She didn't pull back. Slowly, giving her every chance to retreat, he leaned forward and kissed her. Her lips were soft and warm against his, hesitant at first, then responding with increasing certainty. Her hands slid up his arms to his shoulders, drawing him closer. When they finally broke apart, snowflakes were falling steadily around them. "That's one way to stay warm," Daisy murmured, a flush coloring her cheeks. Zachary smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Been thinking about doing that for weeks. What took you so long? Wasn't sure if you'd push me off the scaffolding." She laughed, the sound echoing in the unfinished cabin. "I considered it." The snow began falling more heavily. "We should head back before this gets worse," she said, reluctantly pulling away. They secured the site as best they could, covering exposed materials with tarps weighted down by rocks. By the time they finished, snow was accumulating rapidly, and the path back to Daisy's cabin was becoming obscured. "Stay at my place tonight," she said as they trudged through thickening snow. "Your yurt isn't going to be much protection in this." The storm intensified through the evening, howling around Daisy's snug cabin. Inside, they built a fire and cooked dinner together from supplies in her well-stocked pantry. The domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on Zachary, who couldn't remember the last time he'd shared such a simple, intimate evening with anyone. After dinner, they sat before the fire, wine glasses in hand, talking about everything and nothing. Daisy told him about growing up in a family of craftspeople, her father a boat builder, her mother a weaver, and how she'd found her own path in woodworking. "What about your family?" she asked. "Do you see them often?" "Not as much as I should," he admitted. "My mother lives in Arizona now. My sisters are both on the East Coast. We talk regularly, but life gets busy." Something like that. He took a sip of wine. "They think I've lost my mind coming out here. Have you?" He considered the question seriously. "If I have, it's the sanest I've felt in years." Later, when the fire had burned low and the wine was gone, Daisy showed him to the guest room. At the doorway, she hesitated. "Zachary?" He waited, allowing her to find her words. "This is complicated," she finally said. "You're not staying, I'm not leaving, whatever this is." She gestured between them. "Does it need a definition tonight?" he asked gently. Relief flickered across her face. "No, I guess it doesn't." He brushed his lips against her forehead. "Good night, Daisy. Good night." The storm lasted 3 days, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow before moving east. They spent the time alternating between cozy domesticity and heated moments that left them both breathless. By unspoken agreement, they kept things from progressing too quickly, each aware of the uncertain future hovering over them. When they finally made it back to his building site, they discovered that the weight of snow had caused part of the incomplete roof structure to collapse. "It's not as bad as it looks," Daisy said, assessing the damage. "We can salvage most of the materials." Zachary wasn't concerned about the cabin. During those 3 snowbound days, he'd come to a realization that made the building seem suddenly less important. "Daisy," he said, turning to her. "What if I stayed?" She stared at him, snowflakes melting in her hair. "What do you mean? Here, Montana? What if this wasn't just a temporary break? You have a company, a life in Seattle. Companies can be sold. Lives can change." She shook her head, stepping back. "You can't make decisions like that based on whatever this is between us. We've known each other, 2 months? Sometimes that's enough time to know. To know what? That I want more mornings waking up to mountain views, more evenings watching stars you can actually see. More days building something tangible with my own hands." He stepped closer. "More time with you." Daisy's expression was guarded. "You're romanticizing this life because it's new. The novelty will wear off." "Maybe, but I'd like the chance to find out." She studied him for a long moment. "I need time to think." "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." The next few weeks brought challenges neither had anticipated. Zachary's company faced a crisis that required his virtual presence in marathon video conferences. The cabin reconstruction progressed slowly due to delays in replacement materials caused by early winter weather. And Daisy withdrew, spending more time in her workshop, taking on additional commissions that kept her too busy for more than cursory interactions. One evening in early December, frustrated by her distance, Zachary walked through softly falling snow to her cabin. Through the workshop window, he could see her working late, focused intensely on an intricate carving. He knocked on the door and she looked up, surprised. "Zachary." "I wasn't expecting you, clearly." He entered, stamping snow from his boots. "You've been avoiding me." She set down her tools with a sigh. "I've been busy." "Too busy to talk about us, is there an us?" she asked, meeting his eyes directly. "Really, I'd like there to be." She ran a hand through her hair, leaving a smudge of sawdust on her forehead that he found inexplicably endearing. "I don't fit into your world, Zachary, and you don't fit into mine. Why does either of us need to fit into the other's existing world? Why can't we build something new together?" "Because people don't change their entire lives for someone they just met." "I'm not changing for you," he said, stepping closer. "I'm changing for me. Meeting you just helped me see what I really want." She looked skeptical. "And what's that? Purpose. Connection. Work that matters on a human scale." He gestured around her workshop. "You have that. Every piece you create has meaning. It will become part of someone's daily life, their memories, their story. And you think building one cabin will give you that? No, but it's a start." He took a deep breath. "I've been talking to a real estate agent in town. There's a property for sale with a small house and a large outbuilding that could be converted to a workshop." Daisy stared at him. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious. I've also been in discussions with my executive team. I'm stepping down as CEO, promoting my COO. I'll remain on the board but no day-to-day operations." "And what will you do instead? Build cabins, maybe, or furniture?" He smiled at her surprise. "I've learned a lot watching you. There's something deeply satisfying about creating something with your hands. You'd never make the kind of money you're used to." "I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, Daisy. What I don't have is happiness." She was silent for a long moment, absently tracing the grain of the wood she'd been working. Finally, she looked up. "Show me this property." The house was a modest 3-bedroom on 10 acres, nestled in a valley with mountain views that rivaled his current location. The workshop was twice the size of Daisy's current space, with high ceilings and natural light flooding through clerestory windows. "It needs work," Zachary said as they walked through. "But the bones are good." Daisy nodded, running her hand along a wall. "The previous owner was a sculptor. These floors are reinforced for heavy equipment. I noticed that, thought it might be perfect for your larger pieces." She turned to him, expression unreadable. "My larger pieces, if you wanted to use the space for your business." He hesitated. "I'm not presuming anything, Daisy. I'm buying this place either way, but there's room for 2 here, room for collaboration." "Professional collaboration?" she asked, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "To start with." He stepped closer. "I'm in love with you, Daisy. I think I have been since you told me I was building in a floodplain." She laughed, the sound echoing in the empty building. "That's a strange moment to fall for someone. You challenged me. No one does that anymore. Everyone just agrees with the boss. I'll never just agree with you." "I'm counting on it." She closed the distance between them, placing her hands on his chest. "This is crazy. We barely know each other. We know enough. The rest we'll figure out as we go. What if it doesn't work? What if it does?" She studied his face as if searching for any sign of doubt. Finding none, she sighed. "My father always said I was too cautious, that sometimes you have to risk breaking something valuable to create something priceless." Smart man. He would have liked you. She took a deep breath. "Okay." "Okay what?" "Okay, let's try this together, but I keep my cabin, just in case." Zachary smiled, pulling her closer. "Just in case what? I turn out to be terrible at furniture making? Just in case I need space when you're being impossible," she retorted, but she was smiling. "Fair enough." He kissed her then, pouring all his certainty into it. When they broke apart, she looked slightly dazed. "You're sure about this?" she asked one more time. "Giving up your empire for this?" He glanced around the dusty workshop, then back at the extraordinary woman in his arms. "This isn't giving up. This is trading up." 6 months later, as summer returned to the mountains, Zachary and Daisy stood on the deck of their renovated home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Inside, their newly established joint workshop housed both her traditional furniture business and his fledgling custom cabinetry venture. His cabin on the original property was finally complete, a weekend retreat and potential rental, but it was here, in this house they'd rebuilt together, that he'd found home. "Any regrets?" Daisy asked, leaning into his embrace. "Only that I didn't buy this land sooner," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. She turned in his arms, her expression serious. "I never thanked you." "For what?" "For proving me wrong. For showing me that sometimes people do change their entire lives for someone they just met." "Best decision I ever made," he said, meaning it completely. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast Montana sky, Zachary reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He'd come looking for solitude and found connection instead. He'd planned to build a cabin and ended up rebuilding his life. And the neighbor he'd initially seen as an intrusion had become the center of his world, teaching him that true wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with finding where and with whom you truly belong.